Hi, friends, fellow evolvers, and curious people everywhere. Welcome to this episode of Being with Sally Wilson. I'm Sally Wilson, and I have a very special return guest today. Welcome back, film director, author, amongst very many other things, Bill Bennett. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks, Sally. Lovely to be back again.
It's lovely to see your smiling face, Bill.
Yours.
So, uh, people, Bill is just about to head off to the States for the rollout of his most recent film, Facing Fear. Bill, just for people who aren't aware of this film yet, can you please just give us a nutshell in terms of how this film came into being?
It's a feature-length theatrical documentary. It features some of the world's leading experts on fear. I had previously made a feature-length documentary on intuition, and in making that film, I came across this understanding that fear was the greatest inhibitor to intuition. We have these intuitive impulses; they come up. Most of us don't even realize they're intuitive impulses, but they say go that direction, and then fear kicks in and stops us from doing that. It thwarts our intuition. And I started to realize this, and then I started to realize that I didn't really know what fear was. And in the same way that I didn't know what intuition was when I first started that film. And that made me curious. I thought this is, fear dominates and pervades so much of our life, but I don't know what it is. Maybe other people don't know what it is as well, and how it works and why it works. And that really triggered it off. That was the Kickstarter for it.
And so you traveled around the world
Hmm.
and interviewed a whole lot of people. Um,
Hmm.
and parts of these interviews are featured in the film, right? And so I've seen the film a few times now, and I imagine I'll see it several times more. And each time I watch it, different things stand out to me. So listeners and viewers, the experts that Bill has interviewed for this film are everything from spiritual teachers to mediums to scientists. Who else have we got, Bill? We've got such a broad range of people and different approaches, different ways of looking at fear. What else is there in the mix?
Well, there's a highly decorated sniper, for instance, who talks about fear from a military combat veterans perspective. He's really quite. He's very, very interesting. We've got Dr. Richard Schwartz, Dick Schwartz, who founded the internal family systems. He's a professor at Harvard University. He gives his unique perspective. So there's a mix between science and esoteric, if you like.
Mm.
I've tried to keep that mix in balance, and so there's something there for if if people reject or feel uncomfortable with the esoteric, then there's plenty of science there
Yeah.
uh, to talk about.
Yeah. And I felt very privileged to be at two of your screenings, Bill, in Australia, where you and your wife Jennifer Clough and Judith Richards were there answering questions. Judith Richards is featured in the film, people, um, and I'm curious to know of those Q&As. Has there been any particular person in the film who has challenged audiences the most?
That's a really good question. Um, the film features a fellow called Paul Selig, who is a channel. He's fast becoming recognized as one of the world's most respected and leading channels. He's a highly intelligent man. He's a former academic at New York University. I've known Paul now for quite some time. He's written 9 books, and by written, he doesn't take credit for the writing. He has channeled these books. The books, many people say, are the new Course of Miracles.
Mm.
They're that they're quite extraordinary. And Paul is challenging because there are a lot of people who don't believe in channeling. And in a couple of cases in the film, he does channel live, if you like. I've kept that stuff in.
Mm.
So he's challenging. But I think the thing about the film is that the film triggers that within you, that that is vulnerable,
Yeah.
I guess. And so everybody reacts to different people in different ways according to what they bring to the screening, what they
Mm.
bring to the viewing. And that's really one of the quite interesting things about the film, I think, is that certain people align with certain people in the film and feel uncomfortable. I mean, the film, there's no doubt that the film is very challenging for some people, particularly for people who do have fear, a deeply rooted fear for whatever reason. But ultimately, what I found, two things that seem to be common coming out of screenings. One is that people say, I need to see this film again. There's so much in it. I've got to see it again. And the other is how uplifting and optimistic they come out of the film's feeling.
Yeah.
The film is challenging, but it's also ultimately very uplifting.
And it's also visually uplifting. I mean, it's just so beautiful. And a lot of the filming that you did in Tasmania, it's exquisite. And I'm by no means familiar enough with how films are made to understand the craft of it. But as an ignoramus, I found it spectacular and uplifting in that way, as well as the information and I suppose, inspiration that was provided. And as you say, what is going to challenge and inspire me is going to be different for other people. And what I found really interesting was the second time I saw the film, I noticed the things that my mind wanted to react to were different. The people who were saying things which in the first viewing kind of made me go, really? That stuff that really is just a part of our perceptions and the way we interpret things. It changed. It's almost like there was a different sort of level of comfort. And where perhaps in the first viewing there was resistance, in the second viewing there was more of an ability to witness it, and just hear it differently. And I was definitely one of those people, Bill, who in the first, up in Sydney at the world premiere there, I wished I'd had a pen and paper. Because there were so many things that came up and questions, and just I wanted to make note of little things to kind of go away and think about. And that's why when we had the viewing down here in Geelong, I made sure people had a pen and paper. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. It's very rich. And Sally, I've got to say, when I got to the final cut, I thought, God, have I dumbed this down too much? Because there were cuts there where it was even richer and even denser.
Mm.
But one of the things that I think I do well is I take complex arguments, complex concepts, and bring them down to a point of accessibility for most people, without losing the substance of that complexity. And that's and something like fear. I mean, we think fear. We know what fear is. I know what fear is. Fear is fear. Like, right. What's there to talk about? But when you really lift the lid on it, it's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, in going into the film and making the film, I said to myself very early on, okay, it's one thing to make a film on fear and to look at fear and examine it forensically, but it's another thing to give people tools and keys that they can take away from the film to help them with their fear. And so it was a twofold thing for me. One is the examination of fear. The other was to provide the tools and keys for people to to take from the film so that they can manage fear in their own way, you know, at home, if you like.
Yeah. And I guess the first step in that is recognizing when we're experiencing fear, because it sounds silly, doesn't it? It sounds kind of like, well, duh, of course we're going to recognize it. But there are so many different forms that fear can take, and so many different ways it can, I suppose, I was going to say paralyze us. That's not quite what I mean, but
Oh, it
I
can paralyze
suppose,
you,
well,
absolutely.
it can paralyze us, but when I'm talking sort of on the day to day, fear has this extraordinary ability to prevent us from doing things, prevent us from stepping forward, and we don't recognize it because the internal dialogue um, is so normal to us. We don't necessarily realize that it's been sparked from fear. It's just like working with, for example, high achievers who have relentless high standards, which is wonderful, but they can be driven by survival sort of fear drives, or they can be driven by a joy drive and a fun and an inspiration. And the joy always wins out. The relentless kind of fear driven stuff often doesn't end well, one way or
No,
another.
no, it doesn't. And the film looks at this as well. We have Natalie Ledwell, a very high achieving entrepreneur out of the Los Angeles. She was the co-founder of the very successful
Mind movies.
Mind Movies, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was her baby. And she's fantastic at talking about fear, from an entrepreneur's point of view, of driving her. She talks about how she doesn't feel as though she's really um, stretching herself if there's not an element of fear in her endeavor. But she also talks about the destructive nature of fear as well, and it can be destructive. It can urge you and push you forward.
Mm,
Um, but if you're not handling it and managing it properly and recognizing it, as you say, um, it can also bring you undone in a very ugly way.
yeah, yeah. And as synchronicities tend to happen around this stuff, don't they? Don't they, Bill? One of the books that I was reading, I think in between the my first two viewings of the film, um, was by Dr. David Hawkins. And at the end of this book, um, he said, all fear is an illusion. Now, this was in a section of the book that he sort of said, only serious spiritual aspirants should read this last chapter. So here am I putting it out to the public, to everybody, people who are interested and not interested. But I thought, well, wow, that challenges my idea of fear. I mean, he's coming from a very evolved perspective in terms of, not so much identity with the body, which is very foreign to a lot of us. Is there anything you'd like to sort of speak to there, Bill?
Well, look, on one level, and again, the film touches on this. Everything is an illusion. Our
Mm,
entire life is an illusion.
yeah.
So from that perspective, he's right. From a biological perspective, though, fear is a very real thing. It's a survival mechanism. It's built into our DNA. It's built into our structure, our organic structure, and it keeps us alive. Um, so to that extent, fear is not an illusion. It is something very real and biological and chemical. The problem is that we have taken that mechanism, that protective mechanism of fear, and we have corrupted it. So that some of us have got to the point where, as you said earlier, we're swimming in fear and we don't even realize it. It's just
Yeah.
become so endemic, so much a part of our everyday thinking. And I talk about
Mm,
in the film how I didn't realize that fear had really sort of governed so many decisions that I made on any given day. And sometimes in Q&As, I say to people, ask yourself a question when you're about to make a decision. Am I making this decision out of love or out of fear?
Mm,
And if you bring it down to that kind of binary kind of perspective, it's really interesting if you pass it down how many decisions you do make out of fear.
mm. And there was something that you said in one of the Q&As. Um, and correct me if I've got this wrong, Bill, but I remember you saying, look, you may or may not believe in angels. That's irrelevant, but just try this. Just imagine um, there are angels or support around you. Can you take this further, Bill? Because I can't remember
Mm.
exactly what you said, but I remember thinking, wow, I'm a pretty um, I feel like I'm a pretty um, trust trust based person in a way. That sounds a bit silly, but anyway, I tried that exercise. I was like, wow, that takes it to a whole nother level.
Mm.
And it was such a simple exercise. Can you remember that for our listeners?
Oh yeah, no, very much so. When I was making the intuition film, which is called PGS, Intuition is Your Personal Guidance System, um, I was introduced, if you like, to this concept of angels by both Dr. Judith Orloff and also Carolyn Mays. And I remember asking Carolyn Mays in that film, are angels useful? And she flayed me. She took the skin off me. I mean, Carolyn Mays doesn't suffer fools, and it was, in fact, very funny, but one of the highlights of the film, how she absolutely excoriated me. And but I started then to think about angels, and I started to think, because I didn't, I sort of understood what angels were from a religious concept and all of that, and I'm not a religious person. But then I started to think, all right, well, let's go through this exercise. Let's say these people are right. Let's say there are angels around me at the moment. These extraordinary spiritual beings around me, and they're there to love me and support me and guide me and all of this sort of thing. Now, if they're around me right at this moment, how does that impact how I react to this person? How does this impact on my thoughts at this very moment? I mean, if I think if I think something toxic, um, am I comfortable with that? With these angels right beside me? Um,
Mm,
if I'm dealing with this person in an aggressive and hostile way, am I comfortable with that? With these angels around me?
mm.
And I started to, like you, I started to kind of put this exercise into practice. And I've got to say, Sally, it has fundamentally changed some of my habits. It really has.
Mm.
Because who's to say they're not?
And there's only upside, right? There's only
There's
upside to imagining, whether or not we're religionists, it kind of is, some people might think of it as the universe. Some people might think of it as just, the energy that's creating everything. But I know that, yeah, it's a paradigm shift. It's a real paradigm shift because I think it also questions our idea that's actually mostly unconscious for us of duality, doesn't it?
Well, there's that, but in the end, it comes down to accountability. You are making yourself accountable for every thought, every action, every interaction.
Mm,
Now, whether you're accountable to yourself or whether you're accountable to these supposed angelic beings around you,
yeah.
it makes you, number one, aware of your actions moment to moment and your thoughts moment to
Mm,
moment, because your thoughts are action. Your thoughts are as real and as solid and as dangerous and as beatific as your actions. Um, so it makes you accountable. It makes you aware. It makes you pay attention. And paying attention, I mean, Sally, you and I could talk about paying attention for an hour, I'm sure. Because one of the things that I've learned in the work that I've done to date, this notion of paying attention is so important, but it makes you pay attention to your thoughts and actions and interactions, and it makes you accountable. And you know, in the end, I think that's probably one of the most important things. We have to be accountable for every thought and every action, that we put out there.
yeah. Oh yeah. This brings to mind another sort of spiritual classic. People, if you haven't already picked up on this, I make a bit of a habit to read spiritual classics. Um, I'm as you, Bill. I don't consider myself religious, but I find this stuff. Gosh, there aren't really words to describe. I find it inspiring, enriching, in so many different ways. And one of the texts that this brings to mind is also that of Brother Lawrence. I think it was written in the 17th century. He was a monk in Paris, and he actually didn't write this. It was someone. It was a collection of his letters, and also some conversations he had with this guy. And the way he gave himself accountability. He called it practicing. And actually, this collection is called "Practicing the Presence of God." And I know the word God challenges people. We'll just change the name of it if you like. Practicing the presence of God, and he developed this way of conversing with God internally all the time. So he was absolutely accountable, and he introduces this idea that if you had a visitor all the time, if you had this visitor, would you go off and ignore them and do other things? Would you change the way you think, the way you speak? If this visitor is hearing everything you're thinking, everything you're speaking, experiencing everything you're feeling along with you, it changes your awareness in a similar way, I think, to what you're talking about, Bill.
Sally, I'll tell you something. Anyone can do this very, very simple exercise. You get into a conversation with people around the dinner table and you start to gossip, right? And then you find yourself being drawn into this. And we all love to gossip. But one of the exercises that I have done is I ask myself, when I'm about to say something about somebody who isn't present in the room, I ask myself, would I say that if they were actually there in the room with me?
Mm.
Would I actually say that about them?
Mm.
And that's been a big bucket of cold water over me,
Mm.
to be quite frank.
Mm.
Because, of course, 9 times out of 10, you wouldn't say that to their face.
Yeah.
And if you just, before you actually utter something, before you actually say something about somebody, just ask yourself that very, very simple question. Would I say that to their face if they were here right with me right now?
Mm.
Or if they were behind me sitting in a chair and they were listening to what I was saying? Because on one level they are.
Yes. Yes. Can you just elaborate on that briefly, Bill?
Well, what we put out in thought or word or deed has energy. And energy is beyond time and space. And what we say about somebody in some way impacts them, but it also probably more so impacts us. It actually comes back on us.
Mm.
Um, and 9 times out of 10, what we say about somebody is actually what we're thinking about ourselves. That's so if we're talking about somebody in some kind of negative way, what we're doing is we're actually digging that stuff up from ourselves, and we're really it's coming back on us. It's boomeranging. So that's why I'm very, very careful now. I mean, I try. I still, I still get sometimes caught up with it. Particularly with politicians, but
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
No.
yeah. So it's just a very, very simple exercise. Ask yourself, would I say that if that person were in the room with me
Mm.
right now?
Mm. Yeah, it's and my grandmother used to say, if you can't say something nice about someone, don't say anything at all. And I remember that. I haven't always been able to apply it, of course.
Hmm. Yeah.
um, but sometimes those old, just those
Aphorisms, yeah,
simple
there.
old, yeah,
Yep. There's a very, very fundamental truth behind them. That's why they stick around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Um, are there any questions that you wished had been asked? I know that, when you're at our screening in Geelongville, you really desperately wanted some geeky film questions, and I don't think anyone there was able to ask you geeky film questions. Um, are there any questions that have remained unasked that you would have loved to have sort of tossed around?
That's a really good question. I wish somebody had asked me that question. um, as the film details right at the very start, it's a very confronting start. The film starts off with this very, very long shot of me walking the camera out of focus, and I come into focus, and my first words are, 3 days after I turned 65, I was diagnosed with an incurable brain disease. And then I go on to say that I was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Now, this will be 5 years now since my diagnosis. Um, what I say in the film is that I was thrust into fear. Sally, I'm not sure whether I said this to you or not, but after I did the film on intuition, I started to become quite interested in channeling, um, and I stepped up my meditation practice. And one time when I was meditating, I I called in my masters, my spirit guides, my angels, my archangels, and I said, please bring forth that which will accelerate my spiritual growth.
Yeah.
And then it was not long after that that I began to experience the first symptoms of Parkinson's.
Yeah.
Now, I look at this supposedly incurable, progressive, degenerative brain disease as a gift, as something that I can learn from and something that I can interpret and use in my work and hopefully help other people. I asked myself, why did this happen? Because I don't believe that these things happen randomly, particularly having asked that question when I was in this meditative state. And the only thing that I came back with was that I have to put this into service somehow.
Mm.
Um, and in a sense, I think with the Q&As, I think people are probably a little bit tentative about asking me about Parkinson's and about the impact of it and so forth. I can understand that because they might think that, I'm sensitive to it. I'm not. I'm really quite happy to talk about it.
Do you because I know from, well, the first Q&A at the Sydney premiere, um you it became clear that Jennifer, your wife, hadn't wanted you to name the diagnosis that you had
Well, she didn't want me to mention it at all.
at all, right?
Yeah.
Um, can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, basically what she said was, Bill, look at the film that you've just made. The film that you've just made, says that you create your reality with your thoughts.
Mm,
And here you are getting up in front of audiences saying, I have Parkinson's disease. That's only
mm,
going to perpetuate it.
mm,
Um, she was very, very strongly resistant to my putting it into the film.
yeah.
My response to her was twofold. One is that I have to put it into the film because this has happened to me. It did thrust me into fear. It did allow me to see fear from a very real and personal perspective. And I have to be able to share that with people.
Mm,
But the other thing, too, is that I'm not me, you know? Um, on the screen, that's me. I'm a character. Um,
mm,
I was me at that time. I'm not me
mm,
now.
mm,
So what you're doing is you're not taking into account that I can stand outside of me and create a new me, which is purposeful, um, which has intentions.
mm,
I'm not. I'll tell you something, Sally. In the first 2 years of my diagnosis. I didn't tell anybody. In fact, I kept this secret. Apart from a small group of people, I kept this secret until the eve before the film came out, so 4.5 years. But I went on to these private Facebook groups, Parkinson's groups, and I was what you call a lurker. I didn't put my head up. I just looked at the posts and looked at all this stuff, and it was dreadful what people were going through. I mean, absolutely, terrible, terrible stuff, and and then finally, I posted something and I said, "Look, I'm doing this exercise. I'm taking these supplements. I've changed my diet to this. I'm doing this and this and this, and I'm actually feeling pretty good. And I'm doing pretty well." Anyway, so the administrators wouldn't publish it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it hit me then with real force that they wanted to live in the negative.
Yep.
They didn't want anybody saying, "Hey, you can do good with this." And immediately I took myself off all the Facebook groups. And I thought, what you're doing, what these people are doing is they're creating a status in their misery,
Yep.
in their illness. Their illness is giving them this sort of hierarchical status. And the people who are at the top of the hierarchy are the people who are the most miserable.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm not gonna play that game.
Yeah.
And I've done basic kind of research about Parkinson's, but I don't live my life on Facebook groups and doing, minute research into the latest breakthroughs in Parkinson's, scientific research, stuff like that. No, I'm getting on living my life.
Yeah.
I don't see myself as sick.
Yeah, it's you're not identifying with it. I mean, it's just a part of what your experience has been for however long. But yeah, okay. And that brings up another thing, Bill, because I remember it's amazing the things that my brain's tucked away. At one of the Q&As also, you mentioned that early on when you told a few people, you got some really nice attention. You thought, oh, geez, this is nice.
Yeah. Oh,
and you had to really pull yourself up just to notice that, whereas other people wouldn't necessarily be aware enough to go, that's a bit of a catch. If I'm sick, then I get really nice attention. So, I better be as sick as possible, because then I'm going to get a lot of really nice attention. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think you're talking about the time when I walked into this room that had about 30 people in it that were there for a birthday party. And in fact, the story in the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age, had just been published, which where I came out and said I got Parkinson's disease, and I knew that these people knew. And I walked into this room, and immediately I felt everybody, somebody pulled out a chair for me. Here, Bill, take a seat at this really, at the head of the table.
That's right.
Here, Bill. No, don't you cut the cake, Bill. No, I'll cut the cake. And don't you take the plate. And Bill, don't open that bottle of champagne. No, let me do it. And I thought, bloody hell, this is fabulous. I love this. They're making me feel really, really special. I don't have to do anything. They're doing it all for me. And then I thought, whoa, God, this is a real slippery slope. I can imagine how people could just jump on that top of that slippery slide and just go, just go for the ride. And people do that.
Yes. Yeah, I was when I first moved back to Australia, probably almost 10 years ago. One of the modalities I had studied is called Jin Shin Jitsu, and I'm not promoting myself here because I don't practice this with a public now. So, but anyway, I had heard, Bill, and I haven't told you about this actually. I had heard that Jin Shinjitsu could be very effective in dealing with Parkinson's symptoms and alleviating them and really helping. And one of the websites, so I sort of did a bit of a look, and I found that there was a guy who had incorporated Jin Shinjitsu into his what he did in order to feel better with Parkinson's, and actually sort of he says he got rid of his symptoms. Anyway, I thought, oh, this is fascinating. And I had I knew somebody here where I live whose Parkinson's symptoms were pretty severe. And I asked him, I said, look, are you curious? Would you want to just see what happens? And we did a session a day for 10 days, which is pretty intense. The session's about an hour long. It's Jin Shinjitsu, JIN
Jin
SHIN, new word.
SHIN. Yeah.
Third word, JYUTSU. TSU. Yeah.
Okay.
And the website that I found where this guy was incorporating it into his own self-treatment is called, I think it's called Fighting Parkinson's Drug Free, which is not to say that you can't incorporate his methods without the medication. I mean, you can sort of do both. So anyway, before each treatment and after each treatment, this gentleman gave himself a number 0 to 10 on where his symptoms were at that time, right? At the start, his symptoms were sort of 7, 8 out of 10. I've still got the things there. I mean, this is years ago now. And by the end, they were sort of generally 2 or 3 out of 10. And there were things like the motor stuff, his walk. He'd started before he did the treatments to drag his leg, and his posture had changed, and his ability to speak, and the cognitive stuff. So there were certain things that he wanted to measure as well. Now, by the end, he caught a glimpse of himself in a window as he walked past, and he thought, I'm upright, and things had really changed. And I said, well, this is pretty exciting. Do you want me to show you how you can do this for yourself? He didn't want me to.
Oh, really?
Because he was the president of the Parkinson's something, and it had become it gave him, this is my perspective, I could be wrong, but my perspective was that it gave him purpose. It gave him an identity. It gave him a sense of, this sounds negative, I don't mean it this way, a sense of importance in his community. It gave him so many things that he didn't want to give up. And that's okay. That's okay. I mean, I was kind of flabbergasted at the time. But, now in hindsight, I'm like, well, that's okay. It's a choice then. So anyway, I can totally relate to that sort of idea of, wow, this is actually giving me a lot having this. And so, yeah.
Well, Sally, it's really interesting you say that, because I've got to be careful of the same thing. Now having positioned myself this way, I've got to be careful that I don't, if I can say this, see myself as being a martyr.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very, very conscious of that. I'll tell you something. I'm on medication. I've got to take medication 3 times a day. There's no doubt the medication is helping me. But last night I got about to hop into bed, and I realized that I'd forgotten to take my medication, which I should have taken about 7:30 at night.
Right.
And I thought, okay, I'm not going to take it tonight. I'm going to see what happens in the morning. And I woke up this morning and no difference. So I had, I think the last time I had my medication was something like 1:30 yesterday. So in a strange kind of way, and I don't mean to kind of jinx myself in saying this, I actually think I'm getting better. Okay, so this time last year, I had to go to the post office and I had to send off Christmas presents, and I had to sign the express post bag and stuff like that. Put my signature on. My signature was kind of like a chicken scrawl, chicken foot scrawl.
Yeah.
Um, this year, my signature was almost perfect.
Mm,
In a strange kind of way, and I don't know what's going on, but I do think I'm certainly not progressing at the moment, and
mm,
I do feel as though I am getting better. And I
mm.
think, I mean, Sally, look, I mean, you're a specialist. You probably would see things in me that would indicate that I have some sort of movement disorder, but most people wouldn't.
Yeah.
I present as pretty normal. Well, I've never been pretty normal, but
No, no. So, Bill, I know we don't have an awful lot more time, but you're about to go into the US market. You're about to take the film there and travel around the US and do some Q&As after some of those screenings.
yeah.
Um, how is the US market, do you think, and from your experience, different from the Australian market for this film? Like, what do you think is going to happen?
Um, and once again, that's a really good question, Sally. I think the US, people in the States are more open to this kind of stuff. I think they're more expressive, they're more articulate. Um, because I did the same thing after making the intuition film. I toured that film around America and had Q&As afterwards and so forth.
Mm,
And um, I was surprised at how many people came up to me after the screenings, after the Q&As, and I would often have a throng of people around me wanting to ask me questions. But a lot of people also said, you know what, the same thing happened to me. I mean, the film details how I heard a voice which saved my life.
mm.
And then the film is about how I go on this search to try and find out what that voice is. So I'm expecting that kind of thing. But the other thing I'm doing too, which I'm not sure you're aware, I want to make a third film in this series, and this third film is on hope. And
Yes.
so what I'm going to be doing during this touring trip is I'm actually going to be picking up some interviews on hope as well.
Ah, fantastic. I was going to bring the Hope film up. I was hoping you would bring that up.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's really exciting. And Bill, you made a book. Oh, by the way, listeners and viewers, there is also a podcast episode um, with Bill in Being with Sally Wilson on intuition and the personal guidance system, PGS, if you'd like to listen to that. Um, Bill, are you going to write a book based on facing fear as well?
Yeah, I am. I did a book on the intuition film, which was
Mm,
an expansion of the film. I will do a book on fear because Sally, what happens is this. I mean, one of the principal reasons I make these films is for me to find out about stuff. I'm really curious about stuff,
yeah,
and then what happens is I make the film, and then I learn so much after making the film as well. And talking to people and thinking more about things.
yeah.
And so, people say, "Oh, you really have to have a book, out with when the film comes out." And I go, "No,
Mm,
I actually can write a better book if I write it 6 months or 8 months after the film.
yeah.
Because my ideas and my understanding of the subject actually increases in the making of the film and the conversations that I have afterwards. So yes, there will be a book on that. I'm quite excited about the Hope film because um, one of the things it's going to be looking at is prayer.
Mm,
Is prayer a form of hope? Does prayer work? Affirmations and intentions, are they a
mm,
form of hope?
mm,
Um, is gambling an expression of hope? These are kind of things that really quite interest me.
mm.
And we talk about this whole thing about living in the now, right? How this is the ideal that we've got to live in the now. But hope isn't that. Hope is actually living in the future. So isn't there a disconnect between what the new age people say about living in the now and having hope? You
Mm,
can't have both.
mm,
You either live in the now or you have hope. You
mm,
can't do both because
mm.
hope is a projection.
Yeah, I've considered that friction too, Bill, because it's hope is it's a concept that's so vital to different spiritual traditions, and yet being present. Yeah, I it's I'm looking forward to what you find out about this, Bill.
Yeah. Well, like I say, it's just a start really at the moment, but
Mm,
there are so many things and false hope. Um, One of the things that I discovered, I called it a hope bridge, Sally. When I was making PGS, there were periods of time when I didn't have enough funds to proceed with the next stage of filming. And what happened is I latched onto people who basically were flakes. You know, they were they were they were they were people that were full of shit. And they promised me things that there was one part of me I knew would never ever happen, but I called them hope bridges. And what I realized was that they were a hope bridge that I could cross over in transitioning, from one point to another. They kept me going, even though I know they were full of shit. You know?
that's interesting. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So they actually served a really important function. People would say, "Oh, you wasted your time talking to that person and you invested so much time and so much hope in them." Yes, I did invest hope, but that kept me going.
Yeah.
They were a transition bridge from one point of activity to another point of activity. Um, you
Yeah.
know,
And you weren't naive in that.
no, I was very, very conscious but
Mm,
in truth, I was also there was 5% of me was saying, "Well, this guy could come through."
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they could all these outlandish claims that that he's saying, like for instance, look, he would get on the phone. He was really excited. I've just spoken to this person who's going to be good for a $1 million investment. I go, well, who is this person? And I go, well, he is the girlfriend of the bodyguard of this billionaire. I go, the girlfriend of the bodyguard of the billionaire says that the billionaire is going to give me $1 million. And he goes, yeah, 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 this is going to be great. It's going to be great. And I go, well, get the billionaire to call me and we'll have a conversation rather than the girlfriend of the bodyguard. You
Oh
know,
gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
um, you know, so
Yep.
then say, look, I'll get the bodyguard I'll get the billionaire on the phone for you. I detail in my Camino book this conversation that I had with this billionaire in a plane. I was walking the Camino, and he had promised to totally finance this film that I was wanting to do on a killings in America in India. Um, and I get on the phone with him finally. He's on his private jet over Iceland, and I speak to this guy for the first time in months when this fellow has said, "Look, I'll get you through the billionaire," and he says, "Yeah, I'll put this money into your film on honor killings in India, but who's the choreographer?" I go, "What? What do you mean choreographer? I'm doing this really important social issue film on honor killings in India." He says, "Yes, but you've got to have a choreographer for the dance numbers."
Oh, so he thought it was going to be some sort of Bollywood thing.
Yeah, he said you got to have dance, you've got to have singing, and then he said, and you've got to have ringtones, because he was made his money out of telecommunications. He said you've got to have ringtones in this film so that I can sell the ringtones. And I said, um, I think we're talking about a different kind of film. Yeah, I
Different
mean, this is kind of
intentions, different film, different everything.
yeah,
Different.
yeah. But
Yeah. Yeah.
he was a hope bridge. This
Yeah.
guy. Now, it never
Yeah.
worked out, but so these are the kind of things that I'm really quite interested in this
Mm.
next film on hope.
Yep. And so for people who are in Australia listening to this or watching this, who've missed the screenings here, I know at one point you said this film will never be on Netflix.
Mm.
Um, Where will they be able to access this film, Bill?
In Australia, we'll probably be having some virtual screenings shortly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they should watch out for, on the film's website, or if they're following me on social media, or following the film on social media. Just we will be having virtual screenings,
Yep.
and then beyond the virtual screenings, then it will be going on to Amazon, um, Google Play, stuff like that. Yeah,
Okay, great. And so the film's website is Facing Fear Film, or
facingfearfilm.com.
great. And all of the social media links, are they on there as well, Bill, if people want to connect with you that way?
Yes, they are, and but people can follow me or follow the film on Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
so Jennifer is really on top of all that sort of social media feed stuff
Yeah, yeah,
when she's awake
terrific. And I'll make sure that
during
we
her
have,
waking hours.
yeah, right. I'll make sure for everybody that we've got some of those links in the copy of these episodes as well, so you can look them up that way too.
Thank you.
Um, Bill, thank you so much once again. It's been an extraordinary pleasure just chatting with
Oh,
you
Sally,
again.
it's always lovely talking to you. You know, you do your research. You're just lovely to talk to. So thank you.
Well, and also listeners and watchers, just so I said to Bill, if there's anything that I ask that you don't want, that's not appropriate or you don't want to go there, just tell me or redirect me. And he said, no, no, I'm happy to go anywhere. So that's the open-minded, very courageous person we have as our guest today. And so thank you, Bill, for everything. And listeners and watchers, thank you for joining us in this very important conversation as well. And I'll look forward to seeing or speaking with you all over the waves next time. Bye, everyone.
So.